Welcome to the Outer Realm with Michaela Desrochers and Amelia Pisano. Airing live on the United Public Radio Network, 105.3 FM in New Orleans.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Thursday night segment of The Outer Realm. Please note we are on a pre-record, so we know we're going to have a great time and chat tonight because you're going to have both Amelia and I there. We're broadcasting on United Public Radio Network 105.3 FM from the beautiful city of New Orleans. We are fully sponsored by the amazing people over at Folgers Coffee who have been with us on this journey from day one. Also, huge thank you to Dr. Snick, aka Justin Snicker, the Sonic Surgeon, an award-winning composer of Halloween, horror, sci-fi, dark wave electronic music, which can be found anywhere that good music can be found. And it's his voice and music that you hear for the intro and outro when we have time to do it. We don't always. Sometimes we run a little late. So tonight, we welcome for the very first time special guest Frank Jacob, who's going to be discussing pretty much anything he wants to at this point. The man is versed in so much, extraterrestrials, raising consciousness, secret space technology. The list just goes on. So we're really going to see where this is going to go. We know you're going to love it. Booked for multiple episodes. So, we only bring you the absolute very best. So prepare for that. In order, of course, tonight to participate in chat, it will stream across the usual 8 platforms simultaneously. And you'll have to just go check that out because unfortunately I don't have it set up as it is a pre-record, but you guys know the drill. You know where to find all of it. And we know you'll all have a great time. You'll notice Amelia is not with us tonight, still fighting the darn COVID, which seems to be hanging on like a bad dream. But anyway, enough of that. We're going to bring Frank on and you guys are going to get to know him up close and personal. So without further ado, Frank, how are you?
Hi, good to see you, Michelle. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for taking on the craziness and joining me. So you are really versed in a whole lot on your bio, your short bio. So I am going to let you introduce yourself and make it a little bit easier. That way we can get in the as much other information as we can in our 2 hours.
Oh, wow. So I've got to do the introduction.
Yep, pretty much.
All right. I keep getting hit with that one lately, I noticed.
Here's my short bio.
Let me see, which version am I going to use this time? Okay, I'll use the real version. No.
We'll take
the way I guess if I start at the beginning, I came to Earth and no, it's I think I'm one of those early indigo people or indigo kids because I very early on in my life at 11 or 12 I began to kind of sort of cracked open a little bit, and my perception of the world and reality was altered by some influential books, and the fact that I was hanging out with older kids, like 3 or 4. They were still kids too, but when you're a small kid, they're a big kid, so it's like you're getting more of a mature perspective from their eyes, and that introduced me to some interesting material like Carlos Castaneda books and things like that. And so I started reading those kind of books when I was like 14, 15 years old, and books like The Seth Material by Jane Roberts that were kind of an incredible description of the Matrix, and of time, and it just really set me up in a way. And then I came across material like Billy Meier's, the Billy Meier case in Switzerland, the famous UFO case, right?
Yeah.
And it was a book that was breaking down all the evidence, the recordings and things. And I found it, I guess, I don't know, some flea market or something, and And it really, really blew my mind at that age. And I thought, okay, this is so cool. I really believed at that point that UFOs, even though I hadn't seen one or I hadn't had any experience, I'm not one of those experiencer kids or
That you
anything.
realize.
Yeah. But I just felt in my gut that
Yeah.
this is real. And,
Yeah.
you know, I was so convinced of it that I thought, you know, okay, well, I'm going to find out in the course of the next few years of my life that this is going to, you know, this is a reality. But of course, then you get older and then you realize, you know, you never hear about it again.
Right. It's
And
true.
you integrate yourself into society. So I went, you know, back to sort of didn't go totally to sleep, but I sort of shut down a lot of that and tried to get, you know, figure out how to navigate the normie world
Right.
for a long time. But I knew in the back of my mind that I wanted to do something that could affect the planet in a big way. And I felt that I didn't feel like going to university was the way to do it. So I chose the arts. And for me, since I love filmmaking, and I took a film course in high school and I got 100% on my film project.
Wow.
And I was, you know, I was amazed. And it was a great course because we got to sit after school and watch films for like hours. And I'm just sucked it all in. And I knew that one day I wanted to make films, but I was living in a location that really wasn't conducive to film schools. And so I decided to go into music, and I had a band and we started composing music, and I thought, okay, I'm going to become a famous rock star, a millionaire, and then I'll get into it.
Right. Right.
You know, then of course reality sets in, and, you know, but in the course of trying to do those things, I realize now that statement, it's not about the goal, it's about the journey. It's so true, because that started the journey for me. And that journey took me, you know, from going into the arts and the performing arts and then the recording arts, and then getting familiar. At that time, computers were just coming on board, you know, for all you millennials who are, you know, spoiled and never had to deal with not having a computer or internet.
Right.
These things were all, you know, still way ahead. So we had ADATs. I mean, I was like, wow, digital, right? So, and I started cutting sound effects to films, to motion pictures on early Pro Tools workstations, very, very early. I think our company was one of the top companies. I was in Montreal at that time in Canada, and
oh wow, yeah.
So I started, and I got familiar with how to run computers and sync them up to tape machines, still trying to get that record recorded. And, you know, long story is I ended up traveling around in the States as well. And then I eventually ended up on the West Coast. And at that point, I was deeply into something called living foods, like how to sort of cure or not. I have to be careful with cure. That word cure is patented by the pharmaceutical corporation, but essentially,
wow, that's interesting, isn't it?
Essentially using plant-based foods and sprouting and wheatgrass juice and stuff like that to fortify your system and energize your body to the point where you're kind of immune to illnesses around you. And I was a living proof of it. I'd be working among people who are sick all the time, and I'd be drinking my energy soup, and I would get nothing. Wow. And in fact, I can say to this day that I've been blessed with the fact that I rarely ever get sick. And I attributed that completely to building my body up with those foundational building blocks. But while I was on the West Coast, I got into the record business, and then I ended up in Los Angeles, and then, you know, digital video started to come out, and you know, I went through quite an adventure. And the whole time I was also exploring common law and things that were, you know, there was this guy called Senator Mattson, who was a Colorado common law senator, and he was doing this course on, you know, real constitutional law and how to invoke the Constitution, things. So I got into that for a chapter as well, some legal work, and that was very fascinating. And it's information that is still valid to this day. In fact, it even has a very interesting significance in Germany, where I've landed now, because that is actually where it is really, I mean, you can really utilize that, because Germany is basically still an occupied country and hasn't got any sovereignty. So that, you know, those rules apply here more than anywhere. It's really interesting. Yeah. So,
no kidding.
You know, so all of that just led me on the road to eventually filmmaking became available to the common man.
Right.
And, so having delved into the recording arts and having mastered sort of the digital arts with audio and sound, of course, the natural progression was to take that to the film level. And I ended up, back in Europe, and I got into producing films, like short films, commercials, teasers, series for like the Red Bull Media House.
Yeah.
And so I was working daily with these state-of-the-art computer systems, and I was trying to get them interested in doing some more avant-garde material, but being in a world of normies, that's really difficult. So
Yeah.
so I was looking for a subject, and I thought I have to get into expressing myself fully. That included not just music and composition and but actually visuals and pictures and film.
Yeah.
And so I was searching for a topic one night, and I heard a radio, sort of an internet radio broadcast with the great granddaughter of Dwight Eisenhower and another attorney from Vancouver called Andrew Bishago, who was talking about jump rooms to Mars, and Laura Eisenhower was her name, was talking about being recruited for a colony on Mars. And I thought, what the heck? Like either she's just an imposter, or she's insane or whatever, but I listened to what Rivet did, and she was very lucid and her expressions were very clear, and I totally related to her language and what she was talking about. And it brought me right back a few years earlier. I'd been given a book by a colleague that I'd run into, and it was called Alternative 3, which was a fictional account of some breakaway civilization that had set up colonies on Mars and the moon, and had secret meetings and they were kidnapping scientists and people from the Earth to move them to Mars. And it was a great fiction novel, but it was written by an author called Leslie Watkins, who was not a fiction author. He was a Fleet Street journalist. So he was an investigative journalist, one of the real hardcore like when journalism still had substance, right? In the 70s.
Pretty bad you back that far.
Right.
Sorry, guys.
And so he wrote it after there was a program that preceded it called Alternative 3, put up on a show called The Science Report on Anglia television or something in the UK. And it was a science show that really showed you real science. And I think their show was canceled, and they decided to put out a final episode and created this fictional story, this script about this whole breakaway thing on Mars and stuff. And they hired actors and some good writers, and they put that on. They were supposed to book the show on April 1st, the final show, and that was going to be their final episode. April Fool's Day, right? They ended up not getting the April 1st date, but they got it came out, I think, in July sometime. Right. Anyway, Leslie saw that show, and his publisher said, "Hey, why don't you write a book on that? Go deeper." And so he did, and that book became the book that I was given, and it was a book that Mae Brussel, a very famous American investigative journalist, had in her library, who called it the most dangerous book in her library.
Wow.
And so she was giving it a lot of credibility. And in fact, after Leslie Watkins had written the book, he was getting politicians calling him up saying, "How did you know? Did you have inside information? Like, we've known this stuff is going on." So
aliens.
He realized he hit on a true story. So here I was listening to this podcast of Laura and Andrew talking about this Mars colony. So I said, okay, is this really real now or what? I've got to know. I've got to know, like anyone would say it, right? So at that point I decided, okay, that's it. That's my film. So I'm going to write these people. And if they write back, then it'll be a sign from the universe that I'm supposed to do the story. Right. And, essentially, Laura wrote me back. The next morning, I had a reply from her in my inbox. I'm like, this is so cool. So I made plans, and I started to go. That was the beginning of my career as a filmmaker into secret space program kind of material. Into ultimately, it leads you into areas of which I can only call consciousness, higher consciousness. Because when you breach into these subjects, you realize at some point it's not just about the hardware, there's always this element of human consciousness that comes to it, because there's a connection to extraterrestrials
There
who
is.
are of a higher consciousness, in
That's
most
right.
cases, at least, you know.
That's
So
right.
so that's how I kind of started, and that's probably how you've gotten to know or heard about me, because I made a film called Packing for Mars together with another person I met on the road, Tanya Maidenford, who joined up with me very early with her company Screen Addiction. So the two of us are kind of like a Scully Mulder
Right.
for the next 5 years, pursuing to complete that film.
Mm-hmm.
She worked in Hollywood on, you know, high level productions. So she kind of kicked my butt to get the production level even higher,
Right.
you know, helping me with editorial decisions, even though we had many excruciating battles, scenes
Right.
that I would have preferred to keep in. You know, I struggled and
Keep the
fought for
fighting.
that
Yeah.
one shot, and it's like, okay, it's
Exactly.
gone.
It's like
But
great.
anyway, we ended
Yeah.
up with a film about 2 hours
Right.
long, which has become kind of a classic around the world, and it's a very cinematic version of this topic of secret space program.
Wow. Well, I know you've sent me some photos and such too. We'll make sure that we get all those posted for you. There are those that believe that Mars is, in fact, like a dead planet, that there's just nothing there. There's no core, there's no way. Like science basically will tell you that.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. What do you say to people like that?
Well, I mean, there seems to be two things going on. It seems to be that there's since the 1960s. Let's see how far we know back on this.
Right.
Well, let's just say, okay, let's start with the 1960s. At that point in history, the United States government had to deal with a problem of extraterrestrials that were buzzing around in their airspace.
Right.
And there were several crashes. There was almost like a little war, a mini war that had been going on between these factions of extraterrestrials and humans that were trying to shoot them down, and extraterrestrials disabling nuclear test sites and things like that. And it ended up in the 1960s, they decided to do a think tank study called the Brookings Report, in which they decided to put it to the table. Can we release this information to the public about the existence of extraterrestrial life in the universe?
Right.
And what would happen if we did? And it's a very classic study. And long story short is they decided that if they were to release information about the existence of archaeological remnants on other planets in our solar system, and the subsequent reality that there was other extraterrestrial life out there, at that point in society, it would cause major disruptions. And they felt those were harmful to the system that was in place.
Mm-hmm.
And so the decision was made to essentially keep everything under wraps. And there was also another group out there that had been formed as a result of these crashes, starting, you know, I guess you could say at the very, you know, at the latest would be Roswell. Some believe that there were earlier crashes as well, but Roswell's the most famous one, and there were several after it, including one called the Aztec, which was a very significant one because that was one of the first ones where communication with these extraterrestrials began to take place.
Right, right.
So there was this group formed to do that, and that group was called Majestic. And there is a document that was leaked many years later, and it was finally authenticated, which is a briefing document for people who were brought in to work on subjects within the Majestic umbrella, because there were sort of 12 key guys. And then there were these groups that they would bring in to work on technologies that they discovered or recovered or reversed engineered, like biologists and physicists and things like that. And they were brought in and they were put into kind of like ultra secret facilities to explore the material, explore the facilities, explore the technology, usually with the purpose of trying to create weapons and, you know, strengthening the American hegemony in the world, right?
Right.
But as a result, they, you know, they had people on their team that were in charge of essentially ridiculing anybody out there that put any information out with respect to their own sightings, maybe even their own contact. They were later then known as the MIB. And so these people essentially created a firewall to, you know, so that the public was always kept at a certain level, and they began a process of customizing the population, assimilating the information to the population slowly, so that one day when the time came where they had to release it because it was inevitable, that people were, they'd already been trained and programmed to deal with it. That's what they call soft disclosure.
Right.
Yeah. And on the other end, they were working on they of course had these technologies, which, they weren't going to stop working on these technologies. So they kept working on it. And this is the formation of what's called the breakaway civilization, which another great writer is named is Richard Dolan. That's one of the people that we interviewed in Packing for Mars about 10 years ago. And he was, he's pioneered a lot of that territory from a very, well-researched position about historical records and things. And, this breakaway civilization was privatized. So you had no obligation to report to the taxpayers because they weren't paying for the research. So you didn't have to, so they supplemented, of course, their funding. You could argue that part of the funding came from drug cartels, illicit weapons sales. I mean, black market deals. When you think about it, what they set in motion has really led to where we are now in this chaotic world. There's really an easy explanation for it all. Right. And so as a result, NASA had the obligation, because they are under the umbrella of the military. They are not allowed to release this information to the public. They can't. And neither are the scientists working with NASA. And anyone who does come forward and bring something out is quickly taken care of, ridiculed, or, defamed, or even eliminated in some cases.
It's true. It hinders a lot of research from coming out.
People that think that the planet Mars is dead and cold, they're victims of that propaganda campaign that is started very, very, almost 100 years ago.
Right.
And 80 years ago, at least. Yeah. And so the fact is that there's something called the Journal of Space Exploration, which published a paper called the TSI Journals. And a couple of guys called Crater and McDaniel, I think, were the first people to kind of look at the Cydonia region of Mars. And they actually mapped out the from a mathematical algebraic equation approach, the the dimensions of certain specific objects. So there was this famous face on the Mars everyone knows about from Richard Hoagland, right? There was the 5-sided pyramid. There were other anomalies. There were these mounds and things like that. So they began to look at these mounds, and they would draw lines, and they would start measuring things. And they pretty quickly realized that it seems like some ancient civilization left markers on the surface of Mars, so that one day people that discovered those things would realize there was life. Someone had been there.
Right.
Yeah. And it's not unusual, because we on Earth do it. We've done it on the Siberian region, and they set up forest areas, and they cut them in a certain way so that if people flew over space, I'm not kidding you, this is something they really did. They figured if extraterrestrials are watching us from the moon, they would see, and they could tell that there's intelligent life down there. And these guys figured out that the people who left that information behind on the surface of Mars, they left it to the point where you could even calculate the spin of the atom based on those measurements. That's fascinating material, cool. Really amazing material, like too deep to go into on a quick show like this. But I mean, the thing is, I'm a researcher and I'm a filmmaker, so I'm not an actual scientist, right? But I work with some scientists, and B, we have a network of information that we get this from. So we always want to make our films and our material based on real stuff, not just channeled information, which is an interesting ad, because you bring it in when you have the other stuff and it's an interesting picture. But if you just rely heavily on one person saying they were, at my lab, and they spent, 30 years on this and that, and they have nothing really to back it on, it's not enough material to really make it credible, and we were trying to make films that were you could dip, for people that were new to this material, they could dip their toe into the pool and go, okay, you know, it's lukewarm, I can jump in. We were trying to make it lukewarm. We weren't trying to right away go, okay, there's, you know, colonies all over the universe and there's meetings happening and blue avian or whatever. I mean, that just like, that might be going on, but I have no proof of it. And so we started much more level-headed,
Right.
and we started working with things like the geometry on Mars. So that it became very clear that you know, there was life on Mars. And you know, going back to the documents that I was referring, the Majestic, you find out that indeed who those civilizations may have been that have left those signs. And it traces itself right back to Earth. And so it's fascinating, right? I mean, there's been a couple of things that we found out about that are just so mind-blowing, Michelle. They just, and they're undeniable. Like, you know, monuments were left not just on Mars, they were left on Earth for us to figure out. Hey.
So do you think there's a civilizations that maybe came from Mars? Mars obviously got into trouble because right now it's, you know, it's not, I mean, they're finding traces that it was very similar to an Earth type planet. So they left one planet, came here, and of course they're going to rebuild. So we're talking the same people then, obviously.
Yes. I mean, I've more or less come to I lean toward, let's just say, the idea that humans are the descendants of ancient Martians.
Right. Yeah.
And
that makes total sense.
That, you know, they came, and it's interesting. There's a new movie out everyone probably knows about that's into UFOs and stuff called Moonfall.
Right.
And what's that about, right?
Right.
So we won't give it a spoiler to those who haven't seen it, but I mean, that is like, there's also something called the Saturn Moon Matrix, which David Icke did a nice presentation on.
Yes.
And, you know, working on, you know, the idea that the planetary configuration, like Velikovsky, right, and some other researchers made it clear to us that the configuration of our planets in the solar system weren't always in the same place as they are now. And there's evidence for that, and there's symbology left behind. It just goes back so far that you know, it's hard to, you know, it's hard to find traces of it physically other than in the legends left behind by ancient indigenous civilizations. I think cave drawings and things like that.
I agree, and there's a lot of out of place artifacts. There are locations on the planet that, you know, there are mines that have been found that are like evidence of being around 200 plus million years old. There's locations all over the place that go into hundreds of millions of years, and they're finding things that are like, well, where could this have come from? They've been mining here, or they were settled here. And fast forward closer now. I mean, there's ancient civilizations pre-Ice Age that are showing to be tens of thousands of years old, hundreds of thousands of years old. Like, to say like we're the first kick at the can would be ridiculous. You know,
right?
Simple as that.
Absolutely. So the only question is, did the Martians precede us, or did we come from here, go to Mars, and come back even? You know, I mean, there's like, I believe in the meantime that there's been several civilizations on Mars. And it's interesting to, you know, when you tie in the whole aspect of Majestic, which is kind of a current topic for me because of the whole looking glass subject, which kind of exploded on the internet the last month.
Let's touch on that. That seems to be a big one. Our guest last night, Jen Gerard, did make mention of you and this sensational topic. So please.
Well, yeah, it's just something that I had not anticipated would happen a month ago. It just sort of, I mean, I was familiar with the looking glass because I obviously know Bill Ryan and Carrie Cassidy. We worked with them for Packing for Mars. And, you know, but I never really went deeply into it. And what the information that I thought was that I went into a little bit deeper with respect to looking glass type technology, even though it's not really related, not necessarily related, is something called the chronovisor.
I have heard of it. Yes.
And this was something that Andrew Bishago, who we interviewed for Packing from Mars, talked about participating in as an early, as a 12-year-old boy.
Right.
They would do these jumps, and they would use chronovisor to peer into distant time events in the past, and also in the future, and even use it to remote view current events and things like that. And the inventor of that chronovisor was a Vatican pastor called Pellegrino Ernetti, and he was trying to figure out ways. He was a physicist, and he came up with this idea that there were sound waves captured in the magnetosphere of the Earth, because the Earth is enveloped by its protective force field is a magnetosphere. And this also relates to some other thing called the Schumann resonances.
Yes.
And because sound is a resonant frequency, and it's like when you hit two tuning forks beside each other, you hit one and hold it next to the other, it'll begin to vibrate. His theory was that, well, anything that had ever been said or done has a vibration, has a frequency, and it was released into that mantle of magnetic, like a giant hard drive.
Yes.
And he was so successful that not only did he capture audio, he actually captured image too, because image has frequency too.
Yes.
It's just a higher frequency, but it's still there. And he was able to project in a really grainy holographic fashion events into his laboratory, which were then filmed. And eventually, of course, because it was a Vatican funded project, they were interested in, what are the Vatican interested in? The crucifixion.
Right. Well, what
Christ,
are they interested in?
Right. So things like that. So they explored that stuff, and they filmed it, and they were so shocked by what they found that they immediately shut the project down and took it off the radar, and so it could be because what they found that had happened was not consistent with their version of history, or it could be that they realized having access to that kind of technology is so dangerous that it's probably better to keep it away from everybody, because it could just lead to time anomalies or chaotic things. And the person who verified that this technology exists was another physicist, a German physicist, an experimental physicist called Professor Dr. Ernst Zinkowski, heavily credentialed German.
Right.
The Germans are extremely meticulous, and they don't just screw around with stuff and jump to conclusions.
Right.
They really are hard. And he was an engineer, and he believed in engineering, not theoretical physics, but engineering.
Right.
And he knew about the chronovisor. In fact, he wrote a foreword to a book about the chronovisor.
Oh, that's interesting. So he was aware.
So we found out because we made another film called Solar Revolution, which ties into the Looking Glass stuff as well.
Okay.
But we found out that he wrote this and we had him in that film. So after we were done, we said, okay, we have to interview him for Packing from Mars. And we did. And he talked about the chronovisor and gave us kind of that background to substantiate that it really did exist, that it wasn't just Andrew Bishago's imagination. So, that was for me, the start into the idea that you could peer into time, that it's not that unusual. And the Project Looking Glass technology is something which has to do more with stargates, in the sense that there are these like mini wormholes all around us in space, which apparently are used by they can be used to navigate the universe, so that you don't have to travel from Earth to Alpha Centauri in 100 years, whatever. You can actually enter one of these stargates and be there instantaneously.
Right.
And there's artificial ones and natural ones, and a lot of the artificial ones have been created by extraterrestrials. Okay, this is going to sound pretty crazy for some people, but
that's true.
The Looking Glass project has to do with the discovery of building plans to create a device which you could set up, and it had to be set up near one of these stargates, and it would project timelines into the room. It would project events into the room in a 3D kind of holographic way, that those who are watching, it would proceed from the moment those who are watching forward. And they could tell it was the future because they could clearly recognize the people and the players and the events, but they knew that it hadn't happened yet because they were things that just hadn't happened. They were things in the future. So they worked with this technology, and Bill Ryan and Carrie Cassidy did an interview with several people that were involved in that project. The main guy that people that you could say is had the most intimate connection with the project is a guy called Dan Burish. And there were some other people as well that were involved. But there was a guy called Bill Wood, which surfaced, and Carrie interviewed him, who said that he was brought into the project at a certain point because the people that were operating the looking glass, they were frustrated because whenever their looking glass reached 2012, they noticed there was some event that took place, and they couldn't see beyond 2012, and all the timelines converged into one, and it seemed like all of their plans, and we're talking about the deep state here, would kibosh, and they would end up losing everything they'd worked for. And there was this event that took place, and everything landed on one timeline. And that event that took place, according to this guy called Bill Wood, who later turned out to be a false name, he's also called Bill Brockbrader. He said that the event was the mass awakening of human consciousness, which was going to take place in 2012, on December 21st, 2012, actually.
Yeah, I remember seeing something about that. Yeah, a lot of people feel that the time, our timelines actually change drastically at some point. One is more like a matrix and one is more like the true timeline. Do you think that's part of this event? Do you even think that we're living separate timelines, or do you think we are exactly where we should to be? We should be here?
Okay, well, I'll get into that.
Okay, I'll let you take it.
At this point, if that's a good question.
Okay.
Because quantum physics now is exploring the idea that there's many different timelines running parallel.
Right.
And even many different parallel universes.
Yeah.
Which
like
is also string theory, which is why Bill Wood, who apparently was a Navy SEAL string theorist, was brought in to deal with this problem, to try and solve it.
Right.
And, you could say that it seems kind of simplistic that there's one or two timelines or a couple of timelines. Why would there just be, because every one of us makes a decision every day, many decisions, and we could make another decision. We could go left instead of right, or we could forget something and get stuck in traffic, or and there's a version of us that didn't forget and we didn't get stuck in traffic. And so all these are all potential timelines that are playing out. And for the eternity to exist, for the creator, God, or whatever you want to call it, to have eternal existence, to be omnipresent and omniscient in all facets and all possibilities, the only explanation is that there really is every possible version of reality out there. Every single timeline that could have happened must be available, must be possible.
Right.
And it's only us on our individual soul level that chooses and steers and directs our own personal timeline, which is connected to a consensus timeline. Let's say we have agreed on certain rules to play the game together.
Archaic ones.
And right. But it's like those are the rules we've agreed on to venture through into the timeline and for our own personal growth. So there's that, and then they all converge into one, according to this interview that Bill Wood was giving. It was because there was an awakening. And at that point, humanity was like fully conscious. And when you're fully conscious, you can't lie to yourself or to anybody else anymore. In fact, you see through all the schemes too, that if the government is lying to you, if there's corporations or pharmaceutical corporations lying to you about a product, or if there's whatever, if there's an auto company saying, something about the technology, you realize that this is a lie, and then it busts it all open. But of course, what happened in 2012 is it didn't happen. We didn't have this mass awakening. But what did happen in 2012 is that there was a beginning of an influx of particles, frequencies, radiation from a certain part of the universe, a certain part of our galaxy called Sagittarius A, which is a black hole at the center of our galaxy. And our film Solar Revolution goes into much detail about what that means, how that affects you. And what's happening is that it was, and it's funny because the author of that film who we're working with is a biophysicist in Germany called Dieter Bers. And he posited that, okay, everyone's talking about 2012. Could there be something to it? And he went at it from a scientist perspective, but he brought in the indigenous things like the Maya talk about the Hunab Ku. And that the Hunab Ku is this ray from this galactic ray from the center of the galaxy. Interestingly, like how would they know that?
Exactly.
And that it would begin happening right around now. And suddenly, if you look at the data of, that we're getting that from our sensors that we've put into space around us, we're actually picking up the fact that we can understand our orientation in the galaxy. We can understand where we're traveling. And we've learned that there's something called a galactic plane, and that we actually oscillate around the galactic plane. It's like it's all consistent. And so right now, the Earth seems to be arriving at that galactic plane in a certain position where it actually is subject to these particles and these new form. And if you look at frequencies as carriers of resonance, they're carriers of information, just like a note of voice. My voice has a resonance, it's information. So it's a frequency.
Vibrations, frequency is what it's all about.
And like I was saying earlier with Pellegrino Ronetti, right? And so we're getting information from the center of the galaxy that we've never had before. Yeah. And so this is undeniable, but it isn't something that just like a flip switch and all of us are awakened. But there's some other cosmic events that have been predicted. There's a guy called La Violette who talks about this wave theory, that there's these pulses that take place also, and over long periods of time there's these like supernova type waves that come at us, and they're a lot heavier. And those waves actually can really affect it, like they can really, like a tsunami, hit us, more powerful than the radiation that's trickling at us right now from the center of the galaxy. Right. So, and there's a guy called Charles Hapgood and some others that have explored the idea of, cataclysmic events that have happened on Earth periodically that have been documented in cave drawings, and where the Earth stood still, the poles shifted. Physically, the magnetic poles reversed, and the actual Earth shifted position as well. So that this explains why there's fruit found in Greenland, like areas of Greenland that are now under ice have like forest and, are like fossilized, so it's like this kind of thing is out there, and it seems to be very close to, or if not just about impending again.
Right. I've heard that.
So maybe, this is what the Looking Glass people, were talking about. So anyway, it went silent because, obviously this didn't happen. Bill Wood was defamed. Turns out that he went, he had sexual relations with underage girls. He was court-martialed. He was taken to court. He had to renounce all his testimony. Everyone basically said he was a fraud. Right. And his own personal message was, though, that he told the truth, but he had to say what he said because he had to be consistent with the testimony he gave at his court-martial. So, I mean, whatever, it's up to, it's up to us to decide what we're going to do with that information. Is it true that maybe he was taken out because he opened his mouth? This happens. It does happen. Often. Whistleblowers that come forward with information, they get defamed. They get, they have a sudden problem. Yeah. Yeah. And that was could have been his sudden problem. Yes. But anyway, so fast forward, now we're 10 years later. Okay. And I was on some Telegram channel or something, like not even related to anything to do with Looking Glass or any of this stuff. And it was more about the Ukraine war. And there was a channel that, there was a guy that, was exploring some of the fake, videos that have been manufactured. And that interests me because, I'm a filmmaker. And I when I find out that, that there's viral videos going on showing events in the Ukrainian war, which are totally fake. I want
Yeah.
to check it out. So I checked it out, and I found on this chat group, there was something called, there was this little, one guy posted something, said looking glass. And I'm like, what? This is guy.
I'm supposed to be here.
Not supposed to be here. Like,
yeah.
Now in retrospect, I'm thinking it was put there for me to see, because I never would have looked for it.
Right. Right.
And so I clicked on it, and it brought me to a YouTube channel of a group that had just set this up, like, I think 6 days earlier.
Okay.
I think it was the 11th, and I think it was the 16th or 17th of March
right.
when I found it. And I'm like, and there was 2 videos on their channel. And one of them was called Event 1. The other one was called, the Convergence or something like that. And there were, I think, a total of 80 views. Nothing much going on here. It was like a dead channel.
Right. Right.
And I started watching the videos, and I was just shocked, because they were calling themselves ex-military insiders and people that had worked on a project called Looking Glass in the 90s.
Wow.
And they started describing details about the project which were true, which I knew to be true.
Right.
But there were some differences, though. They were bringing in information which no one had ever heard, more information about how the things worked, that had no one, not even Bill Wood or Dan Burish, really described these kinds of details.
Only whistleblowers would know, because they partook.
Right. And they had said that they were part of this group that had worked on the Looking Glass project, and they they had seen timelines proceeding all the way to the year 2030. 2030, not 2012. And that in 2030, there was going to be a cosmic event, a galactic event, something of huge proportions.
I've heard that.
I was getting goosebumps, right?
I need to connect you with people. Yes.
Go ahead. And I'm going like, God, this is like, I know this kind of stuff is happening, because I know from the scientific angle that this stuff has been projected.
Yes. Did they say what the cosmic event would be?
And could it? Well, the cosmic event is going to be this event that's going to take place where, and what's going to happen is that essentially it turns out that there's 2 factions of people working with the Looking Glass technology that continued working with it. I know it was shut down for a few years, because I think because we came to the certain area in the galaxy, these stargates became too numerous, so they had to shut them down. They had to shut down the artificial ones, and they had to shut the project down because of potential hazardous results. But it was, I guess, reopened. I mean, and the thing is that later, when I went back through my notes, and I got back in touch with Bill Ryan, and I said, hey, you got to give me a crash course again on this stuff. And so I started looking back at some of the notes, and it was between 2007 and 17 that they had shut this thing down, allegedly. Wow. And so apparently they had never completely stopped it, though, because the Bill Wood story said it was over. We had won. The good guys won. We're all going to be enlightened. Basta. And for me, that kind of a thing reeks of disinformation. And so I know he's a nice guy. He comes across very believable. But a lot of actors do. The people that are actors out there, they're chosen for the role because they're very convincing.
That's right.
The reason that Zelensky is the president of the Ukraine is because he was an excellent actor. He was a successful actor. Right. And he acted a role of the president before he became the real president of the Ukraine. So he's very convincing. People believe this guy, even though he never knew anything about politics, and still probably doesn't.
I think we have one of those in Canada.
Yeah, we have one of those in Canada. We got them all over the place now, right? Young global leaders, they're called, I think. Young global actors.
That's right.
Young global inserted puppets, you might call them.
But
anyway, another topic, right? So anyway, this guy, so this information was coming out saying that there's this cosmic event coming, but there's this sort of a conflict going on between a faction of those who are in control of Looking Glass and a rogue faction which broke off that didn't like the fact that those who are in charge saw that the timelines were always going to work out in favor of the deep state. Always. They had to do nothing.
Right.
They just, in fact, whenever they tried to involve something or change something, it's like the looking glass could see it coming and adapted the timelines to adjust for it. So it didn't matter what they did, the result was always the same. Still favored them.
Yeah.
And those people are on a timeline that I call the transhumanist timeline. The
Right.
timeline one that we're on. And that's been developed now they've been building that time and solidifying that timeline since, for over 150 years. Since modern technology enabled them to have more control over the way they influence and control society's thinking, and it's just their mind control has gotten better and better and better. But it started about roughly 150 years ago.
Wow.
With the print, when press began and radio started to get out there, and then later television and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And wars played a big role in it too.
Mm-hmm.
So these people broke away and took the data. They began the data. It's interesting. I'll explain a little bit about the technology. Might be worth taking a little side trip here.
Absolutely.
The technology is actually something that generates a field in the room where you can see these events. And they realized that these events are happening in a cycle. And in fact, it was a 7-day cycle. It would go 7 days and it would end at the year 2030. And then it would start all over again. And it would be another 7-day cycle, but from a different perspective. It could be a geographic perspective, a different political perspective, but they could see the same timeline played out from another angle. And that would go 7 days. And this whole thing would repeat 144 times. Right? Solfeggio, and interesting calculation there. I mean, the numbers works out to 1,008 days to complete a complete cycle of 144, 2.7 years, 76 years. And then the whole thing would start all over again. So once they realized that, well, what are we going to do with this? So they began filming it, and they filmed everything, and they brought in computers to keyword it so that they could follow everything and study it. And so it wasn't like, my idea of the looking glass prior to the guardians of the looking glass, who were the ones with this YouTube channel that are bringing this new information out, was that there was, I just had this idea that there was this computer, they would type in some event that they would like to have happen, and they would see how it turned out. But no, it didn't really work that way. It actually works that they had to actually use the computer to keyword everything so that later they could study and analyze. They knew that on this timeline, this thing would result. So if they actually did try to change it, they would actually be able to do comparison results. Because if they didn't have that keyword or that event cataloged in their database, how would they, just from memory, it would be difficult to figure out what had changed.
Right.
So it was very detailed. So they were able to then, work with it.
Right.
But still, it always worked out in their favor, except for 3 years. In the year 2012, and the year 2016, and the year 2022, there was an anomalous timeline that sprouted. And that timeline was catastrophic to those deep state players that were trying to maintain control of the timeline.
So we're living within that timeline right now. So if we're going to make a difference, this is a year, basically.
Yeah. So the Looking Glass Guardians, they came out calling themselves the Guardians of the Looking Glass, came out with this, 2016 and 2012 have passed.
Yeah.
And we haven't seen the timeline change. I mean, we haven't seen timeline 2, this new timeline, which would lead to the awakening of consciousness.
Which has nothing to do with this great reset.
Right?
Right.
Both timelines, timeline 1, the deep state timeline, and this new timeline would end up at 2030. But in the case of this anomalous timeline that broke out, it was a timeline where society had seen through the games of the deep state and had basically dismantled their plans over the next 8 years, so that the event happens in 2030. And instead of it being a negative event, it's a positive event. And whatever that event is affects us genetically on our DNA level. Right. It's like it unlocks coded parts of our DNA that are inaccessible to us right now.
Right.
This is really interesting to me because I'd done this film Solar Revolution with this biophysicist, and he had explained just how that actually might work. Like, how could it be that you would suddenly have a higher consciousness, right? It's hard to grasp. You know, there's a lot of people out there right now saying, yeah, we're in the fifth dimension. We've already made, or some people are already in the fifth dimension. Now, what does that mean?
Maybe.
You know, it's hard to understand.
It's like a density thing. Yeah.
You still see them. They're still here, right?
Yeah.
The world's, there's still a war going on in the Ukraine. People are still dying, right? We haven't, I'm sorry, you know, it's like.
You need something viable. It's very difficult.
You need something viable. So we had gotten into that viability stuff in Solar Revolution, which talked about, especially one frequency, the 150 megahertz frequency, which was coming actually among the frequencies coming from the center of the galaxy, from the Sagittarius A black hole. Right. And 150 megahertz frequency is a frequency that actually resonates with our pineal gland.
Right.
Our pineal gland is, you may know something about it. If you don't, it's a certain gland in the middle of our brain, which up until the 90s, most scientists thought was just some useless part of the brain. Nope. But the fact is, the pineal gland, actually, there's a lot they know about the pineal gland. And it was just actually another one of those things like with the UFOs that they debunked, or they just purposely hid from society, because it turns out that the pineal gland is in charge of releasing certain chemicals into the brain.
Melatonin, especially.
Which put us into a state of consciousness.
Yep.
A higher state of consciousness.
Melatonin.
One of them in particular is dimethyltryptamine. People take DMT.
That's true.
Because they want to achieve what? Yep. They want to have that shamanistic higher level consciousness experience.
Yep.
So here is the physical science behind how this could actually work with us. And so for me, reading this now with the Guardians of the Looking Glass, I'm like, okay, do they know something, right? Because they're saying there, and there's a lot of sync points. They just know too much information in these data dumps. They're just, I don't know how, if like, I thought, okay, if this is a fake, or if, like, what is this, right?
Yeah.
I mean, even the name is cheesy. Guardians of the Galaxy, right?
Yes.
But it's like, in 2016, I mean, when Trump was president, he started something called the Space Force. And the Space Force, a lot of people that were at the time into the Q stuff were looking hopefully at the Space Force and all these things as a way to kind of beat the deep state. Of course, we know that none of that happened either. But it's interesting that there was a nickname that the Space Force was called. It was called also the Guardians, So I was thinking, interesting sync point, right? Maybe could there be some overlap here? Some of the people maybe that are in Black Ops,
hidden in plain sight, little things hidden in plain sight. Yeah.
And so, but they were describing these events that were going to start taking place that were just like horrendous, which is one of the reasons that the Guardians of the Looking Glass YouTube channel and their message has gotten so much heat, and which is probably the reason why, I read this stuff, and I'll get into the events a little bit more if you want me to. But I read this material, and I started to just, my mind started racing, and I just had this gut feeling like I've got to break the story. And I was looking for 10 days, I thought, where's all the usual players, the Michael Salas and the Dolans, or where are those? I mean, wouldn't they jump all over this? It was like the Guardian, it was a Looking Glass, but nobody, it was quiet. Like nobody was talking about it. I'm like, okay, maybe they just think it's, I don't know what they think, but I thought there was enough here that if this is real, because the events that they were talking about were coming up very shortly. In fact, April 18 was the date of the first event, and the events are, they're like, on the level of bombings and, nuclear war and setting in motion events that were going to lead to absolute cataclysmic events on the earth. And so if they were real, it's definitely worth talking about it.
I've heard it.
And if they're not real, it doesn't matter. What have we lost? We've talked about it.
Yeah.
Right. So I broke the story on the 31st of March, 2 weeks later. And then it got picked up by Inspired Channel. He called me up. John Nolan called me up and said, can we do an interview? So we did an interview a couple of days later. We published it, and it just exploded. So that it's like within days, there were like hundreds of thousands of views, and I was getting suddenly barraged by, like thousands of emails, and I was getting, other channels reaching out to do other interviews, and all because of this, because of the intensity of this information.
I
And the
agree.
intensity has to do with, this one event coming up, which is going to be a bombing in Times Square in New York City on the 18th of April.
Which did not happen.
Right. So the Guardians of the Looking Glass said, we've tried to intervene, but because the other side also has access to the looking glass, they see us coming every time and they stop it. So we can't stop them. But the only thing we can do, we found out, because, we've seen 2012 and 16 come and go, and there has been no change. The timeline probabilities still highly favor the deep state people, the actors in the deep state, the transhumanists, you might say, the timeline. So, and there's no real resistance. Where is the resistance? Then we had COVID, right? I mean, like, nothing but distractions, chaos, fear. Yep. And they just knew that and now 2022 is the final year that they saw that there was that an intervention could change the outcome. And they knew it couldn't be an active form of intervention. It could only be a passive form of intervention. And that passive form, they determined, was for them to release the to open source the information, literally. To just dump it out there. And hopefully people will catch start talking about it and spread the information. And alone the fact that they began sharing and talking and dialoguing about it would basically ruin the timeline of the actors trying to push through the event to happen.
No, you can't keep track of everybody.
Right. And if you have that much attention going on an event that's coming up that you're going to try and do covertly, you can't go through with it, because that's going to open up a lot of questions, and it'll start ruining because that event was only a false flag, which they were going to use to launch a series of attacks on Russia.
Right.
And so, to talk a little bit about what the event was.
Yes.
It was going to be a bombing and on a busy time in New York, Times Square. And they were going to use that bombing to implicate Russia, Putin, as something that he did. And so they launched a series of smaller attacks on the Russian military outposts outside of the Russian borders. They basically destroyed all the Russian outposts.
Right.
The result of that was that Putin volleyed back and hit back on the outposts of the Americans. And then Putin stopped and said, hey, it's not us. We didn't do this bombing. The whole time, in fact, he was proclaiming it wasn't us. We never did this bombing. And because he was restrained in his counterattack, a critical mass of people started to not believe in the story that was put out by the Biden administration, and began doubting and actually giving credibility to the Russians. And so they lost ground. And so they had to do a second false flag attack. And that was to attack, to use a specific strain of anthrax. I think anthrax 182, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be wrong. But there was the point is that this one particular strain of anthrax that everyone knew it was the Russians who had developed this in biolabs. And so when this attack took place on the East Coast of America, hundreds of thousands of people died. And it was a vicious act of war. And it was also, and because of it being tagged with Russians' identification, it had the footprint of Russians that created this chemical. Everyone accepted the narrative that it was the Russians who did this. And so it set in motion a full-scale nuclear attack on Russia, leading, of course, to a full-scale retaliation by the Russians.
Of course.
And it turns out the American weapons weren't as effective as the Russians. The Russians shielded themselves for the majority of the attacks, and the Russians had developed technology which was more superior to that of the Americans, and so the Americans took the biggest hit. And it set in motion a timeline which solidified, without a doubt, the timeline of the transhumanists, which were where they wanted to go, which had to do with massive reduction of population. And then they were going to introduce something we all know, a vaccine. And the vaccine was going to insert like a Trojan horse technology into people that when the event then took place in 2030, those who survived would be hit and switched off. Instead of being switched on, which was the natural new timeline that they had saw coming, they had successfully steered it onto their timeline, and the last remaining resistance was wiped out. And anyone who was then still left to resist, they took care of them with drones. Anyone who left and hid out on the countryside and got together and tried to form a resistance, they were soon wiped out, and they soon basically had their civilization that they've been shooting for, 500 million people, which are their servants, and then a small elite group of people which were left. So
who's left then? Those who were vaccinated and
all those
switched off,
people
or
that
the
are
not
pushing,
vaccinated? Not vaccinated.
Right. The thing is, the people that not only, well, it's interesting. They said that they weren't not vaccinated. They actually found out how to modify vaccines so that they would, when the event happened, and we got these like superhuman abilities, that they would have that plus even more enhancements of it. So they became like gods, which is their saying. They believe that they are God.
Yeah. Right.
You know, and if you listen to Yuval Harari's talks in front of the World Economic Forum, his big saying is, history began when humans invented God, and it will end when we become gods. I mean, these guys.
Yeah, that's crazy.
There's no doubt. I mean, the thing is, the evidence of their timeline's all out there. And the evidence of their total dominance of the media is clear. There's no conspiracy theory here.
No, it's true. Fact. Mainstream media is completely...
And any resistance out there, where is it? Really, is there one country you can go to now that pulled out of the whole game where you can go and there's no forced vaccination agenda? There's no COVID pandemic. There's not even a county or a state anywhere in the world. So, I mean, they've got it under control. And so when I read this with the Looking Glass Guardians, I thought, okay, if it really is true that we can come out and talk about this stuff, then I want to do this, but I want to talk about it in terms of consciousness, because it's not just, it's like when you focus on that event, people freak out when they read that. When they read those videos, they just get goosebumps and they realize, oh my God, we're all going to die. But if they're not focusing on higher consciousness issues, you could easily get swept into negativity and darkness, which is the main argument that people that are not accepting the Guardians of the Looking Glass is saying, that it could just be some psyop written by some clever psychologists or something, right?
Well, they'll have you believe that for sure.
Right. And, and hey, we're not ruling that out. We never have ruled that out. But the fact is, if we don't start a dialogue, somebody else will. So that was ultimately what made me decide to publish it. And also with Dieter Breurs, we decided to start talking about it in Germany at risk of our credibility. We put our names out there. We didn't hide behind pseudonyms. We just started talking about this because we thought, but we decided deliberately in the very early beginnings of it all to take it and move it in the direction of what are timelines? What is the history of timeline research? What does it mean? How can we affect timelines? Can we even affect timelines? We started to take it in that direction. And I think that's what caught fire, because people saw us talking, and me and, John Nolan talking about it in terms of consciousness, and it lit people up, and they realized that this is the way to take the subject and talk about it. And so by the time April 18th came around, we had well over 1 million people that had watched the videos on all the different channels. And that were, and how many more that we're talking about. I was on all these different blogospheres doing interviews. It was like, it's going on now. We're talking now. Tomorrow all week long, I'm doing interviews, right? So last night I gave a presentation, first one ever in Germany or in Austria. And I don't think it's going to go away because, the Guardians of the Looking Glass said that between now and 2030, there's going to be 70 events that have to be prevented to prevent the odds of the transhumanist timeline from being fulfilled. Now, that's very ominous. And I honestly don't know if I can follow that completely. I just think that's so out there that let's just take them one at a time. And if they really are real, we're going to find some, there's going to start to be some serious evidence of their existence. because
I agree with you. And I think working through consciousness is realistically, you're putting all of this information into the collective. So people who are conscious and are waking up are going to draw that stuff from the collective as opposed to all this negativity that's being pumped into it, because that is where we draw from. It's like I would say to people, I laugh because I did an experiment one time with the whole collective consciousness thing. And I used a really obscure word that, nobody's used since like the 50s. I think it was like swell. It was something just really ridiculous. All of a sudden I started hearing it everywhere. I'm like, you see, people are listening. So
yes,
maybe that's the key to making this the year that counts. Is I always post things, awakening, awareness. Let's do this. But I just think people on average are so absorbed in things like this,
yes.
They're like this all the time. Now they're talking about this whole metaverse thing. Like, why would you want to get out of reality to get into a controlled reality?
Well, right. I mean, and that's all part of this plan that has been set in motion. It started with it. You could almost say it started with Bolshevism. And the idea of collectivizing people under a central authority. I mean, I've done presentations that go into, I take direct quotes from the founders of Bolshevism and communism and even Zionism, and I lay them side by side, and you'd be shocked how similar they're completely this. In a lot of ways, they're exactly the same. They're exactly the same intention with pretty much the same language even.
Right.
And so transhumanism, and it has a lot to do with Satanism and a rebellion against a higher creative force, whatever,
Right.
if you call it God or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
your own belief system is.
Yeah.
It has to do with, with putting yourself into a belief that you are part of a greater whole, that there's a creator that is, more intelligent than you, that's wiser than you, that is more spiritually advanced than there's levels of spirituality to gain, to reach, to come back, to unify with the creator. And we are creators. We're the little mini creators. We're little mini versions of the creator. And that's what separates us from the transhumanists who believe that there is no God, that it's all just a bunch of rocks and chemical reactions. And that over time, we've gotten to the point now where we can completely manipulate and alter genetically the code. They just looked at DNA and it is a code, right?
It is.
They're correctly saying that it is a code, but they think that their intervention is going to lead to an improved version of the code before we've really even had a chance to explore the full meaning of that code, because we don't even understand most of our genetic code. Our DNA, they call it junk DNA because they don't get it. And so, I think it was important to bring that into the topics, to say, hey, look, we have this unlocked potential, and we are going to have an event. It doesn't even matter if it's in 2030. Who cares? It's coming.
Right. It's coming. Yeah.
It has come before. And you can look at cycles. And we talked about this again in Solar Revolution, that civilizations rose and fell in direct correlation to solar cycles. We're connected. And the way quantum physics is now evolving, they are coming to the inevitable conclusion that the universe isn't just a bunch of rocks, but it's actually a conscious being.
Absolutely. I agree with you.
And that
100%.
we are connected to it, and so we're connected to the earth. We're connected to the earth through the Schumann resonances, which is a word I said earlier on, which has to do with our pineal gland and a certain frequency. And we're also, by extension, connected to the sun, and the sun, by extension, to the solar, by connection to the whole galaxy and the whole universe, right?
Well, I think, where it comes into the law of one. We are one, all of it, literally.
Exactly. And, and so it's a shame if we abandon that natural evolution in favor of a artificial one, where, I mean, essentially the idea of putting tentacles into our brain is already being pioneered by Elon Musk with his Neuralink project.
There we go. Yeah.
And others. I think that honestly, I think that these public players are just only just a public face of, just like I was telling you earlier, the NASA information, there's a limit. We are told, oh, we're
Yes.
only at this point.
Yes,
But
exactly.
I'm pretty certain that we're already dealing with technologies that are so far beyond that. Yeah. And so therefore, I think we have to wake up. So the other thing that was important about the Looking Glass Guardians is that it was a wake-up call. You know, how much longer are we going to wait before we actually start thinking about transhumanism and the coming age of, you know, this convergence? The event horizon that the transhumanists look at is called the moment when machines become sentient beings, either of their own power, computing power,
1984.
or the power of our human brain, the neurons of our human brain being decoded and stored into a hard drive like thing installed into one of these robots, and then you have this sort of, you know,
Do you think
thinking
it's just
robot.
because it seems too science fiction, too far out for people to get their heads around? They just
Yeah,
can't go there.
you know, that's why we have these Hollywood films. There's already these series out. There's now one called Upload, which is the first, you know, talking about uploading your brain. There were the series Humans, which was already, you know, the integration of these artificial humans with real humans. So
That's
they've
the way they
already
do it,
prepared us for all of this stuff,
right?
you know, and people that are watching these shows without a filter on, they're being programmed, and they're amplifying that, you know. I mean, the important part of consciousness is that if you want to create something, and we are creator beings, the only way you can create is to visualize something. You have to see it. If you don't see it, where's it supposed to come from?
Agreed.
You
People
know,
need
you're just
visuals.
following. Then you're just following along, and right now most of us are following along the timeline that is being created by these other people, and they are using the most powerful tools to suck us into their universe and their timeline, to solidify their timeline. So the odds are, so, you know, the idea, like the Looking Glass Guardian saying that the odds of us breaking free and creating a new timeline are like 4%.
Oh, that's really
It
terrible
scares
odds.
people, but
Yes.
realistically, how could it be any different? How many of us have been out there creating collectively a timeline that is envisioning things that are natural, the natural explosion of consciousness, you know, those
Yeah.
superhuman abilities? We're not
Right.
envisioning a world where some inventors have come up with electric cars that don't run on lithium batteries, but actually draw from the environment their energy and don't need to pollute or don't need to cause any of that. I mean, we're not envisioning these kinds of things. They're not showing it to us on these shows either. Even these sci-fi shows they show us,
Mhm.
they're still using the same crap,
No,
you
it's
know,
true. That's true.
rockets and stuff like that. I mean, they're
Mhm.
completely ignoring the fact that there's technology out there which is not needing rockets. You know, they're
No, it's
still
true.
flying around their rockets. You know, it's like, even, you know, what is Elon Musk is flying with his rockets to Mars, right? It's ridiculous. But they're keeping there, and if we're not putting that filter on, then we're helping them. We're watching their television shows going, wow, that's so cool, the future, you know, oh, we're going to be all these cool
We have no
AI tools and
clue.
stuff. We're going to
Yeah.
give them our power, because
Yeah.
we're going to be thinking in the back of our mind, well, we can't do that anyway, or someone is going to do it, or, you know, we're distracted to the level where we're not even thinking about what our possibilities might be organically, as organic, powerful, creator human beings. I mean, we're far superior. We figured out a way to form matter on this planet into beautiful bodies, and with eyes
Mhm.
and ears and
Mhm.
senses and extrasensory
Right.
perception. And we don't
Right.
even need, we can live on sunlight, you know. I mean, we could eat grass. I mean, we just figured out we don't need to dig giant, you know, mines with huge pollution to create microprocessors so we can have, no, we don't even, we already figured out how to do that without any of it. We could live completely organically like the Indians and be advancing our consciousness, but nobody's telling us that.
Well, maybe that's why they're trying so hard to alter that and make it more artificial, being the powers that be, right? No, we're going to alter your physical bodies. They're just, I mean, let's face it, they went from calcifying the pineal gland and doing whatever they could to keep us from being aware of who we truly are. We say, we're energy beings having a human experience. Well, they can control the human experience on many levels, and they're completely altering it. And I don't understand. I know people right now who they were free thinkers. And then something in the last 2 years, the fear instilled perhaps, that free thinking has changed.
They
It's not there
capitulated,
anymore. Yeah,
right? They capitulated,
it's not
Michelle.
there anymore. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like it's no lo contende. We can't do anything against it anyway.
Exactly. But they truly believe it. No, this is okay. This is the right thing. This has to be. I'm just like, okay, sure. Let's just go with
Right.
that.
And I'm like, and look, I
Fear
have
does
my
crazy
moments.
things,
I
right?
have my moments where I'm like, it's hopeless. But I think, when I read this material from the Looking Glass Guardians, it's like, I thought, okay, if it's a psyop, we can hijack it.
Right.
And if it's real,
Rambo style.
it's real. What can I say? It's intent.
Right.
It's someone on the inside who wants to help, who's saying it's our last ditch effort, people. We have
Right.
one more chance. And,
Right.
and look, I'm serious. We are getting to that critical point of no return. The train has left the station, people. It's rolling down the tracks. You can
Right.
still see it, but
Right.
we have to stop. If we don't stop it, I mean, we might as well then just join the Klaus Schwab gang and say, okay, implant me.
Mhm.
I guess there's not going to be any other way. I'm going to have to join the computer world. And their ultimate vision is that we then eventually one day we merge completely with these. We become the Borg. They've shown us that on Star Trek. That's what we're going to become. They
Well,
programmed us with
we
that.
Gene Roddenberry's story, right, with the Council of Nine and all of
Interesting
that.
that right now that new Picard series, what is it about? There's a timeline in the future,
Yeah.
right? The dark timeline, where he
Yeah.
he comes back, he gets thrown back in time, where actually the real, the real Picard in the timeline, the good timeline made it, but somehow they
Right.
get thrown back into time and into a time where the dark timeline succeeded. And this ties right into the
All of it.
majestic material that came out of Project Looking Glass. It's almost like verbatim. There were these beings that I was telling you about that they captured, and they began dialogues with them, and they determined and figured out that they called them J-Rods, and they weren't extraterrestrials. They were future humans from a timeline that had gone through this dark period, where they went underground. I think it's the descendants of Klaus Schwab and his, friends. They mutated and became like they mutated and became these hideous looking, what we see grays with these buggy eyes and pale gray skin. And those are us in the future. When they came back to this time, just before the event, the one faction called P45s from 45,000 years in the future want the timeline to stay the way it is. And they're just here to grab some genetic material from us that they're going to steal back to the future, to their timeline. And there's another group called P52s from 52,000 years, which are here to help avert the timeline.
Right.
And both of those factions have formed alliances within the deep state on the one hand, so the P45s, who are not going to do any contractual agreements with the human governments, and the other ones, which are. And they're going to try and prevent that cataclysmic event from being a negative one. So when the event happens, it's a positive one. I mean, if they invented it, I got to give them kudos. They've really tuned into all the aspects of the story.
Right.
And I mean, it's coming at us from many different ways, different angles. There's just really a lot of credibility to the storyline.
Right.
And it doesn't really even matter if the events are, what the events are, because the events are happening out there right now. Look at the event in Ukraine right now, the Ukraine proxy war. You could say it's a fake war. It never had to be, ever. In the early, I think it was in 2001, 20 years ago, Putin came to Germany before the Bundestag, and he held a talk in German. He took the trouble. He speaks German. He took the trouble to speak in German and tell them we should be working on an alliance, a trade agreement. We should turn Europe into this prosperous amazing. We have all the resources. We have everything we need to just take us to the next century.
Right. So
But
when you
guess
say
what?
fake war, because people living in this war are going to say, it doesn't feel too fake to us.
Well, no, I mean,
You
it's real
mean
because
manufactured?
there are real bullets being
Yeah,
fired,
a
and there are
manufactured.
real battles being fought, and there are
Yeah.
real, really poor Ukrainians being
Oh yeah,
blown out of their existence.
yeah,
It's disgusting what's taking
yeah.
place.
It is.
What
Yeah.
I mean by fake war is the war never had the reasons behind the war are not being discussed. Instead, we had the COVID narrative flip into place the minute that Putin invaded, and it became like there's this virus and we have the cure, and anybody who says there's anything else that could be done about it is wrong. And so all the media was censored, all the channels, all the Russian communication channels were blocked, so they could not come and communicate with us any longer. And we immediately fell on the narrative being pitched by the CNN crowd.
Right.
And that narrative conveniently omits major historical factors which have led up to this war,
Right.
including this visit that Putin made to Germany, to the Bundestag.
Right. Right.
But
right,
people
right.
don't know that people in America think Germany is its own country. It's
Right.
not.
No.
Germany is a fake country. It's a NGO founded by the winners of the Second World War, and it doesn't have any sovereignty whatsoever. It's just a
Right.
corporation. And whenever
Like
any
the United
major
States
decisions
and a
have
lot
to
of
happen here in Germany,
companies.
they don't come to the Germans. They go to the Americans. The Americans have a major military presence in Germany, and we pay for it with our tax dollars.
Right.
The Russians pulled their military presence out of Germany at the end of the 80s. They pulled out. They said, you guys, and the Germans have in their constitution, their so-called constitution, it's just a rule book that they decided to establish for, let's keep playing along under these rules.
Right.
Until, and it says specifically in that rule book, until one day the German people create their own constitution and reclaim their state as a sovereign nation. Hasn't happened, Michelle. You probably didn't know that, right?
I did not know that, and I'm actually quite surprised by it.
Yes.
Because I mean, you guys are, well, Germany rather, they're very suppressed in a lot of ways, mind you.
Germany
I think
has been
a good chunk
subjected-
of the world is pretty suppressed when you think about all the information that's been kept from humanity on average. I think we're very suppressed.
Yes, and Germany's the absolute textbook case of psyop, manipulation, and population control, mind control.
Oh wow!
There's a whole area on the outskirts of London called Bletchley Park that was devoted 10 square miles of buildings where just people sat and did nothing but devise fake propaganda to put into the German population prior to the Second World War, during the Second World War, and up until the 80s. They erased history books. Real German history books were taken out of the circulation. I think over 36,000 something books were burned, deleted, German history books. And they implanted fake, fraudulent versions, storylines, and narratives into the school books being taught to kids in Germany. And by extension, you people, you in America and me in Canada, where I grew up. I mean, I bought all that stuff because, I mean, you don't trust.
Well, I'm Canadian.
You don't
So
think as a kid, your government's going to go that far and change the history books and stuff.
Right.
We all thought that what happened in Germany with the Nazis and this crazy dictator was real. And most people still believe that. And I'm telling you, if you start digging down into that rabbit hole, you realize the mind control started here at the end of, it's funny, all the Q people and all these like awakened people, they make a big deal about saying how society is controlled by these elitists, these globalists, and they control the media and they control the news and they control the narrative, right? And they control the technology, right? But you know where they stop? At 1945. It's like, oh, but all of the stuff that happened in the Second World War, all those bad Nazis and the connection to the reptilians, that is real. And it's just but if I'm here and I'm reading the German materials I've scraped together of the real stuff, and I'm like, oh my God, people, there's going to be some serious cognitive dissonance coming down the pipeline about real history. But we're getting off the path here, okay?
I dig the whole path, but I do have to make a quick station ID, so I just have to take a quick minute. So all who are going to be in chat tonight, everybody listening, we are the Outer Realm, and we are being joined by Mr. Frank Jacob, and it's a very interesting conversation. It's enlightening, it is informative, and it's all I can say is I'm having a holy crap moment. Let's just leave it at that. It's fascinating. So, oh my goodness, you guys are going to dig this. We are, again, broadcasting in the United Public Radio Network 105.3 FM in the beautiful city of New Orleans, fully sponsored by the amazing people over at Folgers Coffee, also sponsored by Justin Snicker, a.k.a. Dr. Snick, the Sonic Surgeon. So thank you for that. And get your questions ready, guys. We're going to be in chat, and we're going to do our very best to answer them for you. I might even open up the soundboard and get all your comments posted. So let's see what we can do. So, and we're back. Yeah, it is definitely a holy cow moment. It's like, I'm pretty versed in a lot of things. I research a lot. I keep a lot to myself. I think when you become a public figure, which for me, it's been a couple of decades, I've always learned to govern myself a certain way. I don't do political shows, things like that. For that reason, don't talk much about religion, a little bit, but not. I try to be careful on that. And we have a lot of people such as yourself who come on and like, no way, bam, it's out there. And I'm just like, I know. That's all stuff that, it runs in the background. So what do you say, to these people who might be watching this tonight going, come on. I think some people are really open-minded and they're right on board with it. Other people are going to yell out conspiracy theory, which of course that's a term, CIA design term right there. But then you're going to get those others who are just, no, I like being in my bubble. This is safe. This is my safe place. All of this cannot be a thing. What do you say to people like that? How do you bring them out of their shell and say, this is the time? If what this whole looking glass thing is telling you, and this is right. I've seen images of the coronavirus. I've researched it. I've had people talk about it. It's a thing for sure. So, do you heed it and say we are counting down now, and you're not going to have the opportunity after 2022? Is what you're saying, essentially, or like they're saying.
It's like, okay. There's a couple of things going on here. The one is, what do you say to people that are skeptical of all this, that cry conspiracy theory and they're not ready for it?
Right.
All I say is that you're totally entitled to your perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that anyone that decides to venture down into this rabbit hole of material quickly realizes that it's not conspiracy theory, it's conspiracy analysis, because the conspiracies are not. I mean, I think that the two words have been locked together as if they belong together, but they're two different words. There's conspiracy and there's theory. There's the theory of evolution.
Yeah.
Is that real? Does that mean, and,
yeah.
So conspiracies are real. They've happened all through history.
Right.
And there are theories. Theories are things that you try to reach for, like any scientist, when you have a series of informations that you've decoded, for you to get further with your experiment or your train of thought, you posit things and you see if it works. And a real scientist, a good science, will, in the event that they've tried it and it doesn't work, they will abandon it and they will try something else. And it should be that way with conspiracy analysts, because in a way, if you're trying to, the people who are venturing into that material are those people who are looking at society going, something isn't right here.
Right.
It's like, we can't just be stumbling from one disaster into the next.
Right.
Is this all we can come up with? And then you kind of realize that usually all you see on the news is a very small window of information. And when there's capitalist companies out there, corporations, whose sole mission it is to secure their survival and expand their income and bring more money into the pockets of their shareholders, then you realize that there has to be an agenda there. Especially if there's something that comes along that threatens that agenda, what are these corporations going to do? They're going to try to block that. I mean, it's just natural competition. It's like a natural law, until both sides kind of work it out. Unfortunately, for the people who are looking at conspiracies, they have the odds are not in their favor.
Right.
Because there's more people that have been guided into a frame of thinking in society to conform to a system for the sake of stability than there are people who are, think differently, who are trying to create maybe another optional system. Those people have the odds against them. But we're seeing now, after many, many decades, that those people who are steering us along into the system that they've established since, I guess, Second World War, is where things really began to modernize and settle down and turn into this kind of democracy ideology, that the voters will have their way, even though those who really know about democracy know that it doesn't really work that way. We don't really have true democracy. We have the people who scream the loudest get their way, and it's a minority, and they club the rest of the people over the head, and so everyone ends up voting, a small amount of percentage vote for something, and they get their candidate in who has their lobbyists behind them. And so is it really democracy? Not really. In fact, Plato said democracy is the worst form of government. So, but what we have is, so those people who are skeptical, you have to give those who are questioning the system at least the benefit of the doubt, because if you really do think that society is moving in the direction of higher consciousness, of more freedom, cleaner environment, less noise, less radioactivity, because that's where we're entitled to go. I mean, that's where we deserve to go, and that's what we could go to.
Right.
Because we have the technology to go there right now.
Right.
And if we're not going in that direction, you have to ask yourself, is it correct that we're going in that direction, or do we try to stop it? And what can we do to stop it? And so, I mean, that's where it starts for most people. And if you're not ready to take that step, then by all means, keep swimming in the soup of conformity. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, because you have cognitive dissonance. Right. And cognitive dissonance is that feeling where you just feel so uncomfortable that it's more comfortable to keep living the lie than it is to embrace the truth.
Right.
So you don't want to hear the
truth. It's a comfort zone. That's what I'm saying. Like, I think people they feel safe within their zone.
You meant, like you said, the bubble.
The bubble, yeah. It is really difficult. I mean, I many people that are very near and dear to me who are very spearheaded type individuals at one time have become like again, I think, the powers that be did their job over the last couple of years. And I think a lot of these free thinkers with the warrior spirits and the whole 9 yards, really many became very suppressed and went, just like you say, oh, okay, I concede. This isn't a battle that's for me.
They're also facing that, like the art of war states, if you want to beat the opposition, be the opposition.
Right.
So unfortunately, on top of that, another layer that people don't often think about, of those of us who are out there trying to spread truth or get truth implanted into the society out there, there's people out there that are paid shills, that their own sole intention is to come into that new sphere of truth movement and implant lies that are
Yes.
so outrageous and so crazy that even those people who wanted to maybe go that way just step out and they go, I can't follow this any longer. This is just, so you have that disinfo thing going on.
Yeah, you don't know what to believe. Yeah.
And it makes sense. Why wouldn't there be? If you really did want to stop the truth from getting out there, because the truth can damage a good thing you got going.
Oh, absolutely.
And you're going to put your own UFO experts in there, the disclosure people. You're going to put your own experiencers in there who are going to, Klaus Dona, you talked about out of place artifacts before, right?
Yeah.
He had a book by this guy. What was his name? Bob something. Maybe it'll come to me. It doesn't matter. It was a guy American archaeologist who had discovered fossil evidence of fairies and giants.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
He published a book on it, and everyone was convinced that it was real.
Yeah.
And then he died. And Klaus Dona, who's an Austrian out of place artifacts researcher, traveled over to visit his wife because he wanted to go look at the artifacts firsthand. He's an expert.
Right.
Klaus Dona is an expert at determining fakes from frauds from reality, because his day job is to be curator for the Habsburg Museum exhibitions in the world. So they would bring paintings and sculptures to Japan or India or wherever, temporary setups, art exhibitions of the Habsburg estate in Austria.
Right.
And so he was called in to determine the authenticity of the paintings, right?
Yes.
So he went to visit this guy's wife, and she took him into his laboratory. And first he looked at some of the specimens, and within 5 minutes, he's like, "Oops." Oops. And then he said to his wife, because he's like, "How am I going to tell this to her?" He's like, he said, I'm afraid that that these aren't real. And then you know what his wife said? "No, they are real. He made them himself. I'll show you."
Oh, I see.
And she took him to his lab, and then he had all these, this equipment, which he was using to bake the stuff and, fossilize it, speed its, decay, and he was an incredible genius artist, right?
Right.
In fact, he should have just come out as an artist. He would have been famous, but he came out as this guy saying that he was an archaeologist, and he just, it was a bomb.
Right.
Because, when that kind of thing happens, it discredits the whole
everything
field. For a long time. The dust didn't settle for years.
No, exactly.
And Klaus had gone meticulously out of his way to set up an exhibition in Munich in 2001, where he actually had gotten real artifacts, over 400 actual real artifacts on display. He, because of his credibility as the Habsburg family museum, traveling museum curator, he had the cred. So people gave him the pieces to take home with him to Austria and put it into this exhibition.
Right.
And so it was the Unsolved Mystery exhibition, I think it was called.
Right.
So Klaus told us all these stories. So it goes on in so if it happens in the out of place artifacts field, what do you think is happening in the ufology field?
Out of place.
And disclosure field, where people are coming out and saying, we have the technology, we're going to show. You know what, Michelle, the technology for free energy existed in 1952. It was a Lilling engine in Germany. An inventor in 1954 just demonstrated. I found a film in the German archives.
Right.
He was ready to go into production for cars, in the 50s that would run on magnets.
Can't have that now.
No. And then later, 30 years, 40 years later, a team of Audi engineers devised a diesel engine that would run 4,000 kilometers on one tank. And they drove from their plant in Stuttgart all the way down through France and Spain and all the way back again. And they even had a group of in Germany, there's something called TÜV, which is like a certification board that, that is required for you to authenticate something or to certify something as real.
Right.
And they traveled with them on their way because they were worried that everyone would think it was a fraud. but it was certified real. And they said they had production lines and assembly facilities ready to fire up next year, 1990.
Wow. And I bet you that got ixnayed pretty quick.
Well, have you seen those cars that drive 4,000 kilometers on a tank of diesel? I haven't.
No.
But I've seen Greta Thunberg clubbing everyone over the head with her bat of vile, narrative that she's been brainwashed to tell us that we are polluters and we need to find solutions and we need to have a green movement.
That's the big thing now, though. In Canada, that is exactly what's happening. The rising costs of fuel, and we're going to be green by this, this time period, and that's that. And we're even going to give you a rebate if you buy an electric car. Not enough to buy a freaking anywhere near an electric car, but the price
you can still be slave to the system, just a little less.
Exactly. So no, there's just the whole Great Reset thing, it's all these buzzwords, and you hear these buzzwords. Now what is it? Build it better, or whatever. There's the new buzzwords, a little bit more upbeat, positive, because Great Reset is like that's a big change.
Yeah,
but if we build it better, then it's like, oh, okay, build it better sounds good.
Hey, they built it better 70, 80 years ago, man.
I know. It's just like we're a little behind the times, I think. But it is buzzwords. And I think people have been programmed to listen to spin doctors and pay attention to buzzwords because it's constantly like this, and everybody involved is going like this, and people you absorb it. Your subconscious absorbs it. And over time, it goes into the conscious collective, right? It's up there, and it's what we're all drawing from.
Yeah.
And I think somewhere along the lines, when people realize there's something wrong, some people, they realize it very last minute. And you're like, I don't like this after all.
Yeah, we're at the last minute now.
Yeah.
I don't want to be a fear monger. For the last couple of years, I have a good friend in Germany. He's one of the biggest publishers of alternative media, and he's put out all this material for decades. And we meet often, we talk about it, and it's easy to get cynical and just say, you know what, it's over, man, they've won.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, what are we going to do? It's like they've got control of everything, the monetary system, they've scared everyone to death with some virus lurking behind every corner. I mean, they just, it's easy to just throw in the towel, and but I got to say that when I did this, when I decided to just sort of break this story with the Looking Glass Guardians, I didn't think it was going to be much. I just wrote it. I didn't know that there were going to be hundreds of thousands of people, and that has given me kind of hope. When I get up in the morning, I have all these emails in my inbox for people that have watched the videos, and they're like, "Oh my God, you finally connected the dots," and "Oh my God, I'm finally feeling hope," and I'm like, well, maybe it isn't too late. I think we don't need to have the entire globe convinced of this truth.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have a critical mass of conscious, powerful people, decentralized, that are all setting up in their own community. Like, they should be going up to these authority figures who these people. The funny thing is, they always say our leaders,
Yeah.
Excuse me, they're our servants, okay?
Right.
You voted them. They asked for your permission to serve you.
Right.
To serve you.
Right.
Not to lead you.
Right.
Exactly. We lead through our consensus. They execute what we want. And instead, it's been turned around that they're our leaders.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And we've given them our power. What we should be doing is we should be showing up wherever they are, locally, in the smallest level, and saying, hey, did you know this? About this. Maybe it's not the Looking Glass thing. It might be too freaky for them, but it could be something simple like, hey, there was a motor that developed in 1989.
Right.
Why have you, I see that in local parliament that you're pushing through new green legislation. Have you considered maybe taking about, I don't know, $1 million out of your budget and giving it to the guys who invented this? And then maybe next year they'll have a new engine. We don't need to drive all this polluting stuff anymore.
No,
can we do that? Don't. And if they don't do it, show up the next day and say, we got a camera crew here right now because we were here yesterday and you didn't answer us. So now we're going to ask you again. Do you want to give us an answer?
No, it's true.
And you know what's going to happen? These people are going to start to run. They're going to feel uncomfortable. They need to feel uncomfortable. These are not our leaders. They're our servants. Don't forget that, people.
In fact,
Make them serve us.
I have friends in Brazil, and you know how they handle things with their politicians in Brazil? I almost like fell over when they told me. He said to me, no, he said in Brazil, when you elect a politician and they don't keep to their promises, he goes, people have dragged them out in the streets and beat them to death. I'm like, goes, so the next guy that comes in is going to keep his promises. I'm like, you must be pulling my leg. He goes, no. I'm like, what? So, okay. He goes, but we don't have those same problems. I'm just like, I guess not. So, you know,
hey, listen, if that happened to one politician in America, you bet the others would toe line pretty quickly.
You would think.
Not that I'm endorsing violence.
No,
Believe me, I'm not.
Yeah, no, we're not.
But
endorsing
Zelensky's
violence.
doing nothing than that. He's running people that are resisting in the Ukraine out of their house. The mayor of this one town that was pro-Russia, they dragged him out and shot him in the street and left them to lie on the road. You know, and those are Zelensky's people, right? And that's the hero we put up to the actor Zelensky, right? That's what he's doing. He's doing the same thing, but he's doing it for the wrong reason, you know, and it's disgusting what's going on over there. But what I mean is we need to do it in a way that is like, you know,
constructive.
It's constructive, like in a way that just puts it in their face and says, you know what, this is some information you need to know. I want you to give me your reply to the following 10 facts about potential energy devices that are out there by next Monday. I want a statement from the government.
Good luck.
And if you don't have it, then I'm going to come back and I'm going to give you another chance. And if you don't come back the third time, we're going to go to the media and we're going to start talking about it. And we're going to put you out there as somebody who is either too lazy, too stupid, or too controlled to not put the information.
They own and fund the media. That's the problem. You can't get stuff out there. And I also, I just want to be clear, you know, as we're talking about the pandemic and such, this is a real thing. It was put out there. It was designed. You know, they've shown that too. So it's not like we're just making this up. This was a designed thing. No, apparently it was designed. And it was let loose. And it did kill a lot of people. A lot of people got sick. I know all kinds of people who've had it and really suffered from it. It's left a lot of long-lasting effects. Like I'm just watching, you know, Amelia, my co-host, my little compadre, she's on day 22 or 23 of fighting this latest variant. So we know it's there. But I think the big question is why and how did they get a cure or at least something to slow it down so quickly? Like there's just things that I think we as a people, you know, they throw so much fear into you that you have a group of people who are questioning, oh, no, wait a minute, I want to know more about how this doesn't make sense. These pieces don't add up. But then there's this other sect of people that's thinking, no, you know, thank God for the government. Thank God they're giving us money. They're getting these vaccines for us. And we need to ask questions. We can never stop asking questions. And if, you know what, if we get the right answers and it's, you know, it's truthful and you're happy with the answer, okay. But never stop questioning. Don't ever you know, would you take somebody off the street who comes in and says something to you, goes, oh, this is the thing. This is the way it is. Would you believe him or would you research it? As a researcher, not only do I research everything to death, I cross-reference it to death. I want things to validate it, disprove it, debunk it. If I'm left with more question marks, I want to know more. I just don't take anything at face value. Nothing.
Well, what we have in the world right now is consensus science, not real science. You know, so, you know, it's politically motivated. And what we're not talking about also with respect to, you know, virus, like the definition of virus, you know, we don't really understand that there's a germ theory. Remember that word.
Right.
And people don't really know that the viruses have never been proven to exist. This is a fact, by the way.
Wow.
But what is true is that people's immune systems are being heavily burdened. And when we have a functioning, healthy immune system and we're eating properly and the air is pure and the water is clean and we don't have stress like 24/7, 365, and we're not getting blasted by radiation from the outside
Pollution.
constantly,
Yeah.
guess what? We don't get sick. Okay. Not at least not regularly. And what I've seen happen since I was involved, like I told you before, I was involved in like living foods, and I did spend a lot of time researching vaccinations and illnesses and the cause of disease. And what you see is that, when I was talking about chemtrails, I think I started talking about chemtrails in the middle of the 80s, early 90s, because I was noticing them then. And I realized also that people thought I was crazy then, but it's now pretty clear that for a long time, the government has been putting this stuff out there. They've been creating chemtrails. They've been polluting the water supply. They've been dumping their toxins into the food chain and selling to us as preservatives and color additives and flavorings. And, and they've put it into the medical system, so it's like, they're making us sicker and sicker so that our natural immunity. So when we get hit by these, whatever they are, you can call them viruses, maybe you want to call them bacteria, maybe you want to call them something else. When we get hit by them, they hit us heavier and heavier and heavier. So for that people are suffering when they get what's called COVID is no big surprise. It seems completely logical in respect of the descent of society, not just mentally through educational, reform, whatever that word means, deprogramming, de-intelligizing people, for the dumbing down of population, whatever you want to call it. That's been going on. The health has been going down. They're trying to create this. They're trying to get rid of us. I'm sorry. I mean, I just have to say it, and whoever they are, some people think extraterrestrials, people call it the deep state. There is an organized conspiracy by some level of some organization at some level. Maybe it's connected to secret societies. Maybe the secret societies are only their outer layers. But there is there's some form of control going on, because it's clear that there's a narrative out there on a national and international scale that you can
everybody's following suit. Every country follows suit with obviously pandemic is I'm going to say, pandemic is different for sure. People like, of course, if it's a global pandemic, then there's going to be certain protocol, but there's other things that are happening that all governments seem to be in league with. They all seem to follow this certain, I always say, in television, we might call it a gimmick. The gimmick for this show would be this. This is the objective. This show, this is the objective. It all leads to the same thing, though. So, there's certain protocols that all get followed for agendas. I've spoken about that many times, whatever they may be. Nobody really knows how deep the rabbit hole goes, but it's interesting to try to figure that out. And
all I know is that I want to believe that I have the ability to raise my consciousness. And I've read enough spiritual material from when I was a kid that makes it something that's not just some theory, but that it's actually attainable. I've proved it to myself in my life through my own little tiny little successes that I've had, that it does work. You visualize, you can make it happen. You have an idea, and suddenly, like you said, you said a word, and all of a sudden everyone was saying that word. But when I started filming Attacking from Mars, I went out there without much. I didn't have much. I had the Leslie Watkins sort of book in the back of my head. But I went out to try and get the story, and I knew that instantly the universe would work in my favor, because the universe is part of me. I'm part of the universe. We're like an entity. We want to make this happen.
That's right.
So that's why I think people need to know. They just need to know that, and they need to try. They need to try it. They need to visualize something.
Put something positive out into the collective every single day.
Right, exactly. And so many people have written me that have got their own little projects going and things that they're trying to do on their own front. And I think it's amazing. And it's just, we just have to cross that critical threshold, that tipping point where, and that a lot of it has to do with this open dialogue that seems to have started with these, whether they wanted to start it or not, the Looking Glass Guardians have done it.
Right.
Like I was saying with John Nolan, I mean, it's like if people think they're a psyop, well, I guess it went really bad for them because we hijacked their story. And if it isn't, then great. We're on trend. We're on course. We're on course, and we've got a large audience that's discussing it now. And we're going to keep following this stuff. Keep following the next events.
Right.
There's another one coming on May 20th of a Professor Wu. Interesting to see if that will happen or not, and it'll be interesting to see what the next event will be, and we're going to be on top of them,
right?
Because I'll be the first one that's going to bust their asses if they're not real,
right? Right.
And because I want them to be real, because I think it's going to help us. It's a chance we have, and if they're not real, we're going to hijack and kidnap that story, and we're going to turn it into something real, and we're doing it already. We've got that intent, we've got that focus.
Right.
We've already changed the universe. I would say they've changed the timeline.
Well, so if they've done that, it's a curiosity to see if we keep doing that, are these things not real because they're being altered due to the fact that we as a people, as a collective, are changing that outcome. That's sort of interesting as well. Like if people want to go and find out what some of these events are, do you have that posted anywhere, or can anybody?
Well, they have it. Maybe, I don't know if you're going to put anything underneath our talk. We could put a link to their channel.
Yeah, I can go and grab that, and I can put it in when I post
put that
the
link to their
archive on
YouTube channel.
Yeah.
There's been event 1, event 2 is coming up. They've done a reply mail, the 4th video now, to after we stopped the event on April 18th,
right?
Which has some interesting new angles to it, talking about an amulet and a code that's hidden into their text.
Yeah, I'll definitely get that posted.
So I think it's interesting. It's a very fascinating story to follow. And, other than that, I think, we've already, we've changed something. I feel that we've definitely changed something. And even if we, for the very fact that we've kiboshed event 1, the timeline that was, all the events that were going to happen like dominoes after that event have now changed.
Right.
So we so we have to just be on vigilant now for, it's taught us this movement we've started has taught us to question the narrative a little bit.
So just ask questions. It's healthy.
Yeah, and so if we can look at the situation with this proxy war going on in Russia now in the Ukraine, look at the fact that Zelensky's just an actor. Look at the guy Kolomoisky, the billionaire who put him into power, who was his puppet. And Kolomoisky is the puppet of Victoria Nuland. She's sitting in the Secretary of State, office. She's pulling the strings. These people started their little proxy government project in the Ukraine back in 2014 when they did a push to get their people in the government. And they've been running it ever since. It's their little playground for dirty business, pedophilia, biological war labs that they can't run in the United States. And, little payoffs with their oil companies. Kolomoisky's oil company is the same oil company that who sits on the board of? Hunter Biden, of course. Coincidence? No.
I don't believe in coincidences at all.
Look at the story, follow the story, call up those people and say, hey, who are these players and why have you been interacting with them? Why did Kolomoisky, a powerful Jew actually, but he's got triple citizenship, Ukrainian, he's now Switzerland and Israeli. Why is a Jew giving millions or billions of dollars to so-called neo-Nazi Azov battalions? Ask yourself that question.
That's probably a whole other show.
Yeah, I mean, really, right? It goes back to, I don't want to get off topic. We're running along here. So,
no, it's okay. Yeah, I think it's.
What I'm trying to say here is start asking start pushing and asking questions and talking amongst each other about it, like we did with the Looking Glass event 1. And I think we're on the good road to the positive timeline to make that happen.
Right. Yeah, I think it's important to get people focusing on positive. That's the point. I think there's just so much heaviness out there that people need to look for hope. And as they look for hope, I think then they become more open to other possibilities. They're willing to have more open minds. We've got phenomenal listeners here on the Outer Realm, even our entire network. It's people who do ask questions, and it's a whole array. it's a movement in itself, I always say, because, some of the people that do write into the network are very, very, they have their favorites, of course, but they want to know more. And we keep trying to find content, on all levels of the network. But I get a lot of compliments on this show with basically from people from all over the world that say, keep, keep what you're doing. It's become a platform for people at the top of their own fields and for people who want to put out their message. It's all about awareness. And unfortunately, I wish we could just keep going on. It's just like, oh my God. But you are back on July 13th, which, by the way, is a Wednesday. I didn't realize. So that's going to be, we can definitely continue on with that. And at that point, Amelia, gosh, not better by July.
She'll be
really,
better.
yeah. It's going to be a little bit much. She hasn't had the best of luck with this virus to this point. But I am looking forward to it. And this, of course, will air this evening, and I will definitely let you know what the international listenership ended up being, and we'll get some things posted. And I will put a link, actually, when I do get this posted, to the Guardians of the Looking Glass, because I think people, like you say, it's visual. People need to go and read and see for themselves, and I think they absorb it considerably faster than.
Yeah, well, part of it is really just, I think the takeaway is that you have to look at the darks. Don't be afraid to look at the dark stuff. If
Right.
you're not, if you're just analyzing it, and you're not intending it, it's not dangerous to look at it. It's like it reflects the dark. We need to work at our dark stuff too.
Right.
But not just that. It's also, we have to visualize a powerful new earth. We
Right.
have to have a picture of what that looks like. Every one of us is going to have a different picture, but there could be some commonality, like, free energy, or no more pollution, or, we go out and hug our neighbors, or, it's like
pick
everyone.
your topic, what you want to advocate for, right?
Yeah. And that's really what it's about. It's about, we need to see this new world. We need to put energy into that, or it's not going to happen.
Right.
We're not just going to wake up in the fifth dimension because something has happened. Who will have created that world? What's it going to look like? We'll just be reacting again. Instead of,
it's like a cycle.
Yeah,
it's time to break.
We have to break that cycle,
right?
And I think we're going to do it. We have a good chance to do it.
Right.
And the cosmos is working in our favor. We didn't talk about all that stuff, but
it
really is working in our favor. Everything, the frequencies are there, the stimulation of our pineal gland, if there's ever been a time to wake up to your intuition and your special abilities, now is it. It's happening all around us.
Well, maybe this is
nobody's telling you,
I'm
telling you,
No, exactly. This might be the perfect place to start, on the next segment, because, we do have you booked for a few, so we know it's going to be interesting. But if people want to communicate with you and they want to find you, well, how is the best way? Where's the best place?
Well, to reach, if you want to watch our films, then, they're kind of good starting places to kind of go in and open up some of this territory. The best place would be, the easiest place to have it all in one place, is screenaddiction.com. And if you scroll down on that page, at the bottom of that, it's like a very simple page. You scroll down at the bottom is a link to all of our films, and you can download them, you can stream them, you can buy them on Amazon as hard copy DVDs. And if you want to reach out to me personally, I guess just go to my website, frankjacob.com. I'm planning to do a webinar. So, which is a deep dive down into some of this material. Maybe we can go deeper into some of the more details of people that really want to know some of the more fleshed out history of what I was talking about briefly tonight. Then, just let me know. And I'll, it all happened so fast. I just caught my pants down, honestly. But I'm trying to build kind of a splash page and a whole place to sort of register, but I haven't done that yet. So for now, the registering is just send me an email and say, hey, I'd love to do it, or I want to do the webinar. And And then
Yeah.
I'll hit you back with an email when it's up and ready to go, and you can come and we can do it that way.
Wow, sounds really exciting. So I'll make sure everything gets posted. I have all the links. I'll make sure everything gets posted on the main pages, and I'll make sure the links all get posted on this visual YouTube, Podbean, anywhere where this will be on video. We'll also make sure that it's all in there, and people can go and click on anything to find you. So we'll make it nice and simple for you all. But unfortunately, again, we've actually gone over, which is great. I'm glad that you guys, I know you'll hang in there because we're going to leave you wanting more, I promise. But huge thank you, Frank, for coming on. It's just been such, man, it's been informative, I have to say. I always have a hunger for the knowledge, and this is definitely going to leave me with things to go delve in a little bit further. But thank you for coming on. It's just such a pleasure to have you and such an honor. And big thank you to Folgers Coffee for sponsoring the show tonight, each and every night. Thank you. Another thank you to our other sponsor, Justin Snicker. Thank you as well. Please, if you need to get a hold of me, the best way to do this, the outer realm contact at gmail.com. I cannot keep up with the social media. Just Facebook alone is about 120 messages a day. No exaggeration. I lose everything. So please, outer realm contact at gmail.com. Next week, guys, as per request from many people who wanted a pet medium for their pets, Catherine O'Shea is going to be joining us, and she is a pet psychic. Last time we did this sort of thing, it went through the roof. So there you go. You asked, we complied. Thursday night, of course, with great honor, is the return of Captain Paul Watson from the Sea Shepherd. You guys know him from the hit TV show Whale Wars, and we basically know him for his decades of contributions with working to protect the world's oceans and, of course, all of its inhabitants. So that is huge in my book anyway. So don't forget to find Joe and I on the Gray Zone Uncensored again this coming Saturday, 5 to 7 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. To 8 p.m. Eastern. Promise it'll be excellent as always. So I'll behave. Catch you in chat tonight. Good night.